diversity and inclusion consultancy that works with high growth companies to help them kind of understand how to attract and retain diverse talent. And I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves and give a little bit of background about each of them. But to my right, so we'll start to my right. So Amol?
I think I'm to your left.
I mean, my left.
For them, it's the right, though. I mean, it's definitely correct.
Somebody's right.
It's definitely correct. I am Amol. I'm from Knotel. And is that what you had in mind?
You can share a little bit about why you care about diversity and inclusion.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a good idea. I think it's nice, but it's also helpful. It helps companies. I'm sure you guys have more to say about that. I'll say why, but later.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Hutchinson-O'Neill. Excuse the accent. I'm from Northern Ireland. So if you don't understand me, it's probably because I'm talking gibberish, and that's fine. So I head up talent and resourcing at a company called StepStone. I've worked in the talent and D&I space now for, goodness, about 15 years. And my take on it is really around the how do we embed D&I into the front end of our processes to hire people into teams who don't just look differently but think differently. Neurodiversity is a really, really big topic area for me today, so I'm hopefully going to touch on that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samar Birwadker, founder and CEO of Good&Co. Started in San Francisco and acquired by an unlikely company in Germany. So I think we've learned a little bit about diversity since then. And Good&Co is really based on the idea of building well-rounded teams using people analytics. And that's an area where that I have a lot of passion in, because all of us at Good&Co strongly believe that the next 30 years, the most value we're going to create in the economy is by unlocking people's strengths and talent, by quantifying people's strengths, essentially. So, and happy to be here, talk with Amol and Kat on the stage, and Kellie.
Great. Thank you all for being here. So we're kind of going to free flow. And I think when I was asked to do the panel, they were like, can we have real talk about diversity and inclusion? I've been on lots of panels and been to lots of events where we kind of have this very edited conversation. So I'm looking forward to diving in with you all. And actually, I want to kick off just based on Good&Co and everything that you do around diversity, particularly diversity of thought, and how teams can really leverage different strengths in different types of people. And so my question to you is, diversity of thought versus diversity of background, are they at odds or are they one and the same?
They may not be one and the same, but there is really high correlation between the two. And that's what we found in our own research. And coincidentally, we actually do have a feature on our dashboard which allows you to assess what the level of diversity of thought is on your team and hire people for fit to well-rounded teams that have enough commonalities and enough differences that creates sort of the right, just the right energy. And what we found in our research that teams that are diverse in thought are also highly correlated with teams that are diverse in visible background. And if you think about it logically, right, it's basically people that have had different experiences, whether it's age, sex, location, gender, where they grew up, how they were raised. All of those things contribute very heavily towards how we think, and those things seep into our life. And there's no such thing as like personal, professional anymore, right? It's all bleeding into one with the millennials. And because of that, we see a really high correlation just based on millions of data points that we have on people between visible diversity and sort of diversity of thought. We can't prove causation just yet, but we can definitely prove very high correlation between the two.
And I'll just kind of push more on that topic, which is, do you think that talking about diversity of thought can help or hinder companies to be able to embrace diversity and inclusion in their workplaces?
I can start. What we found success in is, success in terms of companies being receptive to it. There's one thing as like checking a box is what we need to do is hire diverse people. but when you actually speak about it in an economic-based formula, showing that diversity of thought in a team will lead to better products or better design or better productivity, people staying here happier, longer, be more productive, and actually map those metrics to what HR recruiting organizations care about, then I think the side effect of that would be more diverse talent that's visibly diverse based on the backgrounds. So we talk about it in an economic formula way, that if you actually have more diversity of thought on teams, that actually helps your bottom line as a business. So we find that it's a lot more, those conversations are a lot more progressive than just checking a box.
Is this thing on? It's kind of political, right? I mean, diversity. I doubt anybody here is like against diversity, and perhaps there are places here in America and other parts of the world where people are just not for it, I guess. But even those of us who are for diversity on the basis of fairness and social justice, you get to some questions, and then you're like, man, are we going to do this for diversity? Are we going to make this really tough choice, trading off this against this thing in order to achieve diversity, and sacrifice some other thing? And I don't know if you've been in the room very often for that, but it's pretty hard to use the pure social justice argument on a business topic. You know, you don't use social justice usually on marketing performance of some ad or whatever. You know, there's sort of ethical red lines that I wish everybody had on a lot of different topics, but on some of the difficult questions, it's a little bit hard to do. And so kind of, you know, it is very helpful. My sort of lame way of putting it is I think diversity is nice and helpful. I mean, I think the nice bit is the social justice. I think it's something that we should all be part of. But the helpful bit is the pragmatic benefit of diversity on teams and in companies. And the pragmatic benefit, I think, is what you're getting at, right, Samar? And I see it too. And I think everyone's probably seen it. And I was sort of, I don't know, I was not sure if I'm awake last night or dreaming or what it was, but I was thinking of those, like, you know, like Ocean's 11, you know, those like heist movies where all these like random weirdos show up in Las Vegas and they pull off the perfect heist of some painting from some museum. That is a very nice example. It's usually all white dudes, but it's usually a wonderful example of a lot of different people coming together and figuring out, oh my God, there's the laser tripwire. I would never have known it if the Italian hadn't already been in a Turkish prison.
That's what we should have called our product, Ocean's 11. Damn it.
So yeah, it does work, and there's quite a significant literature on how effective it is when lots of different people come to the table, right? I mean, I assume you have that view.
Yeah, no, I think I probably wanted to push back on one thing that you said a little bit, which is it's really hard to measure diversity of thought in organizations, and it is if we're looking at it from within organizations, but you can measure it socially in terms of the impact for neurodiverse populations. In the US, it's really hard to get metrics around employment rates for neurodiverse populations. It's a bit of a struggle in Europe as well. But in the UK, to give you an example, over 70% of people who identify as being on the Asperger's or autism spectrums want to get into work. All of the surveys the National Autistic Society have done have told us that the single biggest cause of depression and stress within that community, which is the biggest cause of suicide within that community, is people feeling isolated, and we can fix that through work. But only 17% of people who actively want to find jobs here on the autistic spectrum in the UK are actually in work. Is this one not working? Yeah. We'll swap over.
Oh, sorry.
He's tapping the mic. So yeah, only 17% of people in the UK who are autistic or who have Asperger's are in paid employment, and actually for the majority of them it's still not full-time employment. So I think we can look to social indicators that we're not doing a good enough job in organisations. We recently did a survey of the top 100 organisations in the UK, and it was really sad. You know, what we found there was that over 90% of respondents, as you'd expect, came back, and these are senior directors of HR and resourcing, came back and said, of course, D&I was a top priority for their company, and they had huge D&I programs that sat against it. That same group of people, when we asked them about neurodiversity, they said that less than 6% of them had even talked about it, and they hadn't even audited their hiring processes to check if they were actively discriminating against people who were neurodiverse. And how many of us have hiring processes that are built on glib things like collaboration and teamwork as being essential requirements for roles, which naturally rule out many people who sit within those spectrums. So I think there are indicators that we can point to, and there's an emerging set of data that tells us we're not doing a good enough job generally on non-visible D&I. That was a long answer to your very, very eloquently put point.
Samar, you and I were talking last night, and you told a really great story, which I would love to talk about here. But it really highlights one of the, I think, challenges is we talk a lot about diversity and getting diverse people in the door, but we don't really talk so much about how to help them thrive once they're in the workplace, and also how to manage them. And we can totally jump off from the topic of neurodiversity because when you are thinking about the things that we consider as socially acceptable that we want in a person for a role that may actually not be essential to them being able to do their job well, things to your point, like or coming into the office, right? Like for some people who have anxiety, that may be a cause of stress and roll them out from work that they could otherwise do really effectively. And so I was just wondering if you could share your experience if you feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I'm also still learning and evolving and recognizing things that I'm also learning and evolving and recognizing things that I could have done better in the past, but my co-founder, Dr. Kellie Schofield, when I started Good&Co from my couch almost 7 years ago, and this has just been mostly trial and error, not because I was trying to hire neurodiverse people. It's because I was broke and I needed someone who understood psychometrics. Someone who understood psychometrics and psychology to be able to build this model for the future.
He's breaking the mics.
I'm sorry. God. Can you guys hear me okay? Right.
Diversity.
And I hired Kellie on a freelance platform called Elance, and basically in her response to my to the proposal, her proposal response to my post was she basically solved the problem in it, right? And that was like my first interaction with Kellie, and over the years I've learned a lot about autism and introverted autistic oddies, as they call them, and extroverted oddies, and they're very, very different flavors and very different approaches. And so what I'm trying to get at is, like, in Kellie has single-handedly created so much immense value for Good&Co. Because it took me a lot of trial and error, and we had issues, but we've been working together for 7 years. And Kellie's very introverted, and she wouldn't tell you what the problem really is and why. And it took me years to discover what it was. But when I heard a talk recently from Sarva, who's a very extroverted vlogger, very high on the autistic scale, and she very openly talked about challenges. Like, she's sitting in a meeting and she's just beating her pen on the table. That's her way of assessing information in a meeting. But everyone around her would be like, wait, stop, like, we can't focus. But she's actually already solved the problem that the briefing is about in her head. And that's her way that she consumes information and puts it out, which doesn't fit our institutionalized way of how we expect people to collaborate. And that's something that I learned with my relationship with Kellie too. And we were lucky to have Axel Springer and StepStone allowing us the opportunity to Kellie can work from wherever she wants. Kellie sometimes doesn't leave her 2 blocks of London for months. She likes living in the country. She rarely comes into the office. And at first it was all because Kellie's genius, so we should let her do what she wants to do. Because when Kellie works for 2 days in a month, she creates more stuff than a team of 12 psychometricians can do in a year. So the value to business is immense. Can we put a formula and a pattern around it? Probably not yet. But I think expecting them to be working in a way that's very institutionalized and how we expect high quality work to get produced in organizations today is just not fair. And I think we're losing out on a massive opportunity of hiring neurodiverse people, because if you look at the biggest inventions we use today, there was a very exquisitely gifted, talented, neurodiverse founder who created the technology. And there's, like, historically so many examples. That's encouraged me to go actively seek out and recruit neurodiverse talent, because I need to have a good counterpart in the corporate world for them, but it just creates immense value for business, and I'm unsure why more businesses don't actively seek them out.
I also just want to zoom out a little bit too, and for the
Can I get in on your question though? Because I think Samar was dodging it.
Well, I was going to say, what are other things that people can do?
Yeah, because the company has to change. It wasn't Samar turning it off. I think it's turning off. Is it on now? Can you hear me? I'm just teasing. Well, I think part of the mandate though is when folks show up. We'll just share this one. Part of the mandate is when folks show up, it has to work for them, and the company's going to have to be different than it was in the past. I think one of the the past notions of diversity was just like, oh yeah, we got to like go recruit in different places or change the pipeline a little bit or whatever. And it turns out to be just like super shallow. It's not effective to get people in the interview room and then have that not work, or get them hired and have the first day be horrible, or the second day or the second week or the 10th month or whatever, and then failure to promote or to advance in the company, and then at the top levels of leader, like all those things are connected. And it's not just connected to pipeline. The universities are not producing enough of XYZ. It totally isn't. Actually, you should think about it in the reverse direction. And if you do, you start seeing. Okay, you can hear me, but that dude can't. If you think about it in the opposite way, and you think like, how hospitable is this organization to outsiders? I was considering the following thought experiment. I'm curious what you think about it. There are many world-class organizations around, and we often admire them. We admire the super elite investment banks and consulting and all these kind of places, and I'm sure you guys have been at these places, and then you feel proud because it's like, wow, 99.99% of people did not get hired here. They were so selective. I'm in the club. And then once you're in the club, they just like rain down all this wonderfulness on you, and you're like, man, this is the kind of company I want to build one day. You might say that, And even those places are moderately dysfunctional, honestly, having been in some of them. But the way they got there is by excluding almost everybody. No one's invited. It's a company that says, get out of here. And then a few of you, we will coddle you long enough so that after 2 years, you finished your associate program and you're fired anyway. That is how most of them work. They fire you on your first day and say to leave after 2 years. And as I was thinking about this, I'm like, man, is this like are these organizations role models for the way you build a business that can absorb lots of different kinds of people and actually create the teams that they themselves would say are better when they're more diverse? They're, I think, seeking diversity. Actually, what they're doing is operating a massively exclusionary model and then flipping around and trying to just like save the people that they already got rid of. That seemed wrong to me. And so I started noodling a little bit, and there is a big literature, and I've been reading a lot of different stuff and talking to all these big experts. And I'm not a diversity and inclusion person, and I rarely use either of those words, actually, because as soon as you use them, you hear echoing in your mind all the talks that you've been to that all repeat the same arguments, And so in my company, one of the things that we've started thinking about at Knotel, because Knotel is this business, right? We do flexible office. We have 100 buildings, 5 cities around the world. A few years ago, we were nothing, and now we're the global number 2 to WeWork, and we're going to be a lot bigger than them. We're already bigger than them in New York. We have twice as many buildings as they do. So as we're building this business, we're thinking about like, well, what do we do? We're a few hundred people. We're going to be a few thousand. It won't be so easy to say goodbye to 99.99% of all the candidates that come at us. And actually, we work in the real world. We don't work in Silicon Valley where just the algorithm or the simulation has to work, right? We work in the real world with real people. Someone's running the elevator. Someone's at the front door. Somebody just walked in with some flowers. Like, the business involves the real world, and it looks like the real world where we operate. Do we? And what would it take for us to look like that? And so what I started thinking about is there's like an insider pattern and an outsider pattern. And if you think about outsider patterns, when someone's sort of new to the party, they came to your Thanksgiving, and they're somebody's like girlfriend or whatever, it's their first time there. Outsiders, they have certain kinds of experiences, and depending on what their life was up until that point, there's certain other kinds of, some of them are invisible patterns, some of them are very visible, some are socioeconomic or race or gender or the different kinds of origins. And these outsider patterns, there's actually not that many. There might be like 20, maybe, or 25 or something. Like, one of them is anxiety. Lots of outsiders have a lot more anxiety than insiders do. So if you put it back in the language of race, like, the white male can say whatever they want, they're exercising their privilege, what a jerk. And then there is a young black woman who entered the room full of these cigar-chomping white dudes. Well, one of the things that I would feel, too, if I entered that room with the cigar-chomping dudes, I'd feel a little worried, I'd be like, well, should I speak up? When do I speak up? And when I do speak up, what's at stake? And, ooh, I kind of flubbed a little word. Am I screwed? Is it all over now? Can I ever speak again? That's a really conventional outsider pattern that happened to you at the Thanksgiving party, too, or when you were the best person at the wedding, or like, there are these situations that happen. The room has, I think, an obligation as much as the recruiting department to operate a little bit differently to make it possible to be someone new at the party. That's what I was noticing, and I wonder how you handle.
Can I actually follow up with a question on that? That's super interesting thought, because what part of that is conscious and what is subconscious, and what part of it is like trained, because being exclusive is supposed to be a good thing, right? Do you think this is at least highly correlated with how we do business in America and how the street runs these very single-minded metrics, like same-store sales quarter over quarter? and we compromise every other metric.
I think you can do well. I think the teams do better. I mean, I think what you were gesturing at, and in some of the literature this is true as well, so they did, whatever. There's some MIT person at Media Lab, Sandy Pentland. And they did a bunch of experiments on thousands of groups. And in these groups, they took the same people but juggled them differently. And they also had the groups managed differently. Like there was a different rule set to follow in the room. And then they had to do stuff. It looked like work, but they were games. It was like make a house of cards, get through this maze, whatever. And so the groups are trying to do some stuff. Really tangible and measurable how well the people did. And in these different types of groups, they constructed artificially these different scenarios. So there would be groups where there'd be somebody there who's like 10 years junior to the others, no expertise. There's a bunch of PhDs and there's some clown in the room, and maybe they look a bit different and all the rest. And the person would make some suggestions in the meeting as the team's trying to figure out what to do. And the suggestions would all be wrong. The person actually didn't know anything and actually did not contribute a specific idea that was actually the tangible benefit. That team did better. Those teams did better and they solved the problem faster. Because the team worked differently. Yeah.
And that's fascinating, I think. But at the same time, right, like my hypothesis is that tied to how just the economy in the U.S. has evolved, just the wage gap, for example, or between genders, or the disparity in income between the top 1% and everyone below, I think that all is very, very highly correlated with our approach in the past, right? In the past, it used to be like, okay, we're going to get awesome together. But then there came a time when everyone was like, nope, we're going to get ahead and then shut the door behind us. And in some ways, I think that has contributed greatly, but at the same time, like we're still I guess in more traditional terms, the best knowledge or innovation economy in the world, especially when it comes to tech or whatever people want to say tech is. So there's conflicting arguments, but in the same time, like being in Silicon Valley, but also spending a lot of time in Germany and having gone to Techstars in Texas, right? I think that balance between living in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble, which is the Valley, and then having more mainstream experiences that are closer to Heartland America, I think that trains our discipline to empathize with both sides. And from our data, we also say that giving people the opportunity or having a room that is open to let you be, right, all comes from empathy. That's literally the number one trait that has the highest impact on someone's success at work. But how do you train people to be empathetic? Because doesn't a lot of that come from how you were raised and your mom and like your experiences?
So I guess I'm going to butt in a little bit. I kind of feel like it's really easy to over-intellectualize D&I sometimes. Frankly, I just think we're a bit shit at recruiting people who are diverse because we're a bit crap at the way we assess people. I've got loads of experiences I can give you on this, but how many times have I walked in as a consultant to an organization and they're like, man, we've got a really big problem. We don't have much diversity. We're losing loads of people. We've got high rookie turnover. One of the first questions I go and ask is, okay, well, how are you assessing for these people? Oh, well, we're assessing because we want them to be super collaborative and they've all got to be great team workers. Well, okay, what job are they doing? They're going to sit in a call center tied to a phone all day. Okay, therein probably lies your problem. How did you come up with that as your criteria? Well, the ops manager over there said that it was a good idea and it had face validity, so we went with that. And it doesn't take a genius to do the work that you go and you do the assessments, you do the focus groups, and you realize you're actually just recruiting for a bunch of people who think the same, who probably look a bit the same, and actually it's completely the wrong skills for the job. So we recruit the wrong people with the wrong behaviors and the wrong skills who are all pretty similar to each other, and then we bring them into organizations where managers don't really know how to manage people who are different. They know how to manage people who might look a bit different or who might sleep with different people to the people that they sleep with. But when it comes to people who are actually different in the way that they think, they really, really struggle with that. And simple day-to-day examples of that could be, I've seen somebody have a neuro meltdown in an office where they had a complete meltdown and ended up on the floor because somebody in the powers that be in that office decided to overnight move from fixed desk to hot desking. And they came in and they moved this person's stuff. And this person had a meltdown and because they couldn't control their environment, and they ended up getting disciplined for it because the answer was they might be neurodiverse, but it's not acceptable to behave like that in our office. We're just doing a really bad job of supporting and training people in the workplace.
I agree. And one thing I live and die by is every time an employee or someone at Good&Co doesn't work out, you can always trace it back to a shitty manager, including me. When my solid hires that I felt were going to be amazing didn't work out, is because even a lot of research shows that managers are the single most impactful KPI, if you will, in helping people succeed at work and be happy and be productive. And I think we don't invest enough in managers, and I think managers sometimes forget, especially new managers, right, when they're moving from I'm awesome at coding or I'm awesome at pushing pixels. But now you're a creative director, like you're leading a team of 10 people, like your job's completely changed. It's become the opposite, right? And we don't invest enough in people to help them make this transition. Just because you have 8 years of experience being an amazing designer doesn't mean you actually have people skills. I've made those mistakes a lot, and I'm learning from that. But managers really are the most critical component, both in research and my personal life experiences I've seen, that makes amazing employees do shitty work.
You can learn to have empathy. And you can teach people to be managers, right? Because I think I heard from you 2 points that there is a little bit of tension between them. Definitely you got to teach people how to like lead teams and all that. I don't think anyone really gets, and I don't even know where you would learn this. I don't think business schools, or I don't even know. People ought to be teaching. Yeah, right. And actually companies should be beefing up their capabilities in order to help their folks. And if you yourself are a manager and have other deputies and others that are responsible for folks, this is one of your obligations to teach them how to lead people. One part of what you're trying to teach them is empathy, and actually how to create environments where outsiders feel welcome and they can participate. And it's not that squishy, actually. And it's kind of in the literature too, but like there are little moves you can do. Like there's a handful of moves you can do in meetings that makes meetings work better for everybody. So one of them is you can tell everyone, and then you yourself as the leader of the meeting cannot monopolize the meeting. You can also ban interruptions. That would be very nice, and you could try to help enforce the prohibition on interruptions. You can try to manage meetings for equal time. You can ask people that are in meetings to share your goal of engagement. So you've been in meetings where people are sitting like 3 rows out with laptops up or whatever and not in the meeting. That isn't really like, you're not actually together in that meeting. Like you're on a commuter train or something in that meeting. If people are in a meeting and you're going to spend the time face to face, you might as well actually follow the cues on engagement, share equal time, not interrupt, not monopolize, and actually finally, and this is a little list, it's also from the Pentland stuff, and finally, encourage non-hierarchical, so not just like hub and spoke type interactions in the room. There should be sidebars. There should be folks who float out of the meeting and bring other random people in. The meeting maybe shouldn't be a constant group of people every single time it happens. So this handful of little patterns, you'll let the outsiders get in. People feel a little bit more welcome. They get to say the thing they want to. There's not only one person dominating all the airtime, la 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 la. And it's just mechanical. It's like you can be trained on that, the way you can be trained on making a good PowerPoint or how to give a speech or whatever. And I have seen it. And maybe in like the best college classes you were in, everyone was so energized because like the professor was doing it that way, and then these other droning horrible ones. Like you've seen the difference between the mechanics of governing a room, and your managers can learn to do that.
Yeah, I would say there are 2 sides of this work. One is kind of the technical side. So yes, you can teach people, you can come in and you can say like, this is how we're going to run meetings. These are really tangible, tactical things that you can do to kind of minimize bias and make sure that you're hearing as many perspectives as possible. And then there is the adaptive side. And I think to your point, like the adaptive side, which is really like, how do you help people evolve and really understand how their identity plays a part? How do you teach someone about privilege? All of these things are certainly more nebulous and take a bit more time, and it's questionable whether it's the company's responsibility to do that, and I think that that's challenging. We have only 7 minutes left. I know you want to hop in.
One really interesting thing we noticed is so Good&Co came about with a very ideological concept behind it. I didn't come from HR, recruiting, or didn't even know there was a business model around it, but it really came about from the idea of self-awareness, learning more about who you are, what your strengths are. And a lot of times we ourselves, the worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves, right? And we don't obviously consciously do that. So there's a feature we introduced in the app where obviously you can take all these quizzes about yourself and learn more about your strengths and say that you're a mix between Lady Gaga, Kanye West, and Steve Jobs, and these are your traits. It makes it a lot more personable. But then there's a feature we introduced which allows you to ask your friends to answer some these quizzes about you. And basically in your own personal dashboard, you start seeing how I see myself versus how others see me. And then as you sort of continue to take more quizzes, you see those gaps diminish, because that brings more self-awareness. So I think whether it's with technology or not, I think that self-awareness is sort of the key to build empathy, because most times people don't really think they're doing anything bad. It's like, because like my boss cares about this metric I need to hit by the end of the month, I'm going to be an asshole and tell people like work hard or like work until 10 p.m. and stuff, right? So we don't allow people or give them the benefit of maturity, because we don't see ourselves as sort of owning their life in some ways, right? And as you become more and more self-aware by people chiming in into who you are, I think that creates a massive difference transformation. Technology is one way to do it, but it's just basically a canvas more than anything else. It's our way of expressing opinions.
And actually, this is a perfect transition, which is I'm super passionate about solutions, right? Like, I think we all know that diversity and inclusion is a problem. And oftentimes, a lack of resources are a big part of the kind of excuse or why we aren't doing more. And I do think that we get caught up in not wanting to take risks because we don't want to do it wrong, especially when we feel like we have limited resources and we have limited buy-in and we can't get it wrong because then we won't get those resources again. So my favorite question to ask is, if you could push any initiative forward, regardless of budget or buy-in, to make strides around this topic, what would it be? What's your dream?
Push any industry forward?
Push any initiative. So if there was something that you could do within your own company or the industry to actually make a real impact around this, what would you do?
What I think I would do is, I don't know what the initiative would be called, but one of the things I try to focus on is, if you're not fucking up, you're really fucking up. And I actually show that in practice by actually building KPIs around it that reward people for screw-ups. Not every company, startup, big, small, is lucky enough to be able to implement that in practice. We sometimes struggle too, but it ends up being, what I see working is actually tying that to a manager's KPIs. Like, you don't make your bonus if everything's just business as usual, or set up a project where there needs to be enough traction, even though there's no immediate value associated with it. At times we've done that well, at times we haven't, but that's what I would do, like build failure as a habit within the company and actually celebrate failure, because that's what builds the best innovations in my mind.
I think for me it's a little bit different. I think for me it's probably design of work. I think that's the biggest challenge that we've got in organizations. We're still in so many companies super traditional about the way that we think of design of work, and that's everything from your physical location to the way that you're managed, being managed by inputs rather than outputs. And that really causes problems for us around not only how do we manage teams, but also the diversity and inclusion of the people that we're bringing into the teams, because it limits very often in the way that we've designed those jobs and the way we're selling those jobs, the sort of people who we're going to attract into them or who are going to be comfortable staying in those. I think organizations need to be a lot more open-minded than they are today.
We talked about recruiting. You can move the needle in the company by recruiting differently. It's because of the politics and the law and just like the feelings on the topic, people do not move with conviction on diversity recruiting goals the way they would on like a marketing goal or like an engineering goal. You'd be like, oh, we got to ship this thing by December 15th, otherwise everyone's fired. You would never do that, some reason, on, you know, our company should have a similar proportion of different ethnic minorities that the city or the country has by January 1st. For some reason, you can't do that. You can't be like, and then maybe it's just illegal or maybe it's actually wrong. You can't just be like, oh, this job should be filled by an African American. We don't have enough. That seems wrong. But something that you could totally do is say, I would like to see 20 women candidates for this role. And then we'll consider all comers, but hey, recruiters, go find me 20 women candidates. Every time I ask my people to do that, we always end up hiring a woman candidate, African American, whatever, that we're looking for. And I can't get my colleagues to do it. They're just uncomfortable with that level of like search in favor of a certain role. And I don't know, maybe it's a bad thing. So I'm curious actually afterwards if I can hear advice from people who are not my colleagues, because my colleagues are shy about telling me whether it's a good idea or not. But I do know it works. And if you had a goal in your business and you failed to achieve it, as we continue to do on Diversity Matters, you would fucking do something different. And it is weird that people just don't. They just do the exact same dumbass thing again and again. It's very annoying. So I would change that.
And that's called the Rooney Rule, and it's an amazing thing.
Yeah. No, can I just say, the Rooney Rule was introduced to me by my colleagues. It's some football thing about how they would never hire like black quarterbacks or black coaches or something like that. And when they introduced it to me, they said, let's have one African American and one woman candidate. Yeah. That is not enough.
So that's actually not how the rule is supposed to be implemented. The rule is, and obviously it has evolved from the original Rooney Rule, but the concept behind it is that when you're hiring for a role, you should have a proportionate number of, a representative number of different demographic backgrounds before you hire. So to that point, I want to see an equal number of male and female candidates come in for interviews.
Can I add one more thing on this?
And other forms of diversity.
I am super interested in the topic. And there's a thing called stereotype threat. When you remind an Asian American before a test that they're Asian Americans, somehow they do better on the math. If you remind a woman before she goes into a room full of men that she's a woman, somehow she does worse in that setting as assessed by whatever metrics. And stereotype threat, one of the ways it happens is you're like the only African American in the waiting room for the interview, because that is representative of the population. You're one of the 15% of candidates. So in some ways, the Rooney Rule, as it has been explained to me in the past, and perhaps something more proportional would be better, maybe even lopsidedly in the other direction, because that Rooney Rule has been working against our candidates in the past by just bringing minorities of candidates into these larger settings. They end up performing worse. But maybe the bigger version, your better one, the Kellie Rule, is the one that we should be following.
I know one of us has to run and get a flight, so I want to be conscious of that. I guess we can wrap up. I know we have 5 more minutes. If you want to ask any questions,
we can continue chatting. I know you have to run.
Yeah,
get a flight,
I'm really
but
sorry.
you should do that.
I've literally got the only flight back to Scotland tonight, so I've
do
not
it.
Gave me access.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. You have questions. You have questions. Great.
I think we can continue with the questions, right?
Yeah, but we will let you run.
Amazing. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
See you
I'll
later
see you.
Okay, so I don't know if we're supposed to say the name, so I'll just no, don't say the name. Got it. Okay. Oh, these are interesting. Okay. Do you think that diversity changes from top to bottom, or growing diversity in entry-level roles? So there are, just to provide more context for other people in the audience, there are thoughts that if you hire diverse people at the leadership level, that will naturally trickle down because diverse leaders will hire more diverse people on their teams. And then there is this other approach of you should get as many diverse people in the door at the entry level and just grow them. So is there a better approach between the two?
Why not both? If you're looking to build diversity and there is an economic value associated with it, you should do it at all levels. I don't know if one's better than the other. I think it's just a mindset. So.
Well, I think you definitely have to do both, because if you hire people at senior levels that are the first representatives of their group in that level, it's an undue burden on folks there to advocate and single themselves out and try to change other parts. They're just trying to survive and make it work in your company. That's not even welcoming them probably in the first place. In the other direction, if people are new and they're the first members of the group in the front lines of the company, well, how will you advance without role models and patterns and other changes in the organization? I don't think you can work at one level or the other.
Thank you. We have a second one. We have time for one more question. Okay. Sorry, another one just came in. So why aren't we assessing for empathy in the hiring process?
Yeah, why aren't you?
And maybe how can we? If
we are, Good&Co is, and actually a lot of companies have started to see that. It's because, frankly, I think that we've always wanted the same things for hundreds of years. The internet in many ways has just accelerated the rate of change, and then that's also accelerated what meaning of work is and what people's expectations of from work are. And especially millennials, they get a bad rap because we feel like they're entitled in some ways, maybe, But the reality is they just come in with a different set of rules, and they don't want any boundaries between the personal life and the professional lives. They want to have the same set of values. And if they like people they work with, they also want to hang out with them after work. And the reality is, I think, one, the internet has changed things far too quickly than workplaces have been able to adapt. But more importantly, there just aren't the right tools being built for organizations to actually measure those things. And there's also not enough proof provided that empathy. There's research now that shows like there's correlation between more empathetic people, or empathetic and introversion are both factors that, when brought together, actually is a very trainable employee, and investing in training more is much more valuable than actually hiring people that you just expect to do awesome out of school and know all the answers to all the questions. But I think it's changing. And I think as we're becoming a more urban-led society, and especially in large cities, people are sort of blending in more across different cultures and attitudes and motivations. I think it's starting to seep into organizations slowly but steadily. So we can measure it, and some companies are.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you both for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thanks.
We'll talk about this with you here.
Yeah, that was so fun.
Thank you. You can just